Hi, this is David Kipping, host of the Cool Worlds YouTube channel and professor of astronomy and astrophysics at Columbia University. To celebrate reaching 1 million subscribers on the Cool Worlds channel, I am going to be doing a special Ask Me Anything episode. I'm half nervous, half excited. This is going to be fun. So grouping a couple of questions together here, if you had unlimited access to any and all of the world's telescopes, what study would you want to conduct with it? And which future telescopes are you most excited for? Is there some proposal you feel strongly about or might want to see happen in your lifetime? Well, if we leave neutrino telescopes and gravitational wave telescopes to the side, usually with electromagnetic telescopes, the thing that we really care about is photon counting. We just want as many photons as possible because that leads to higher signal to noise. So the ultimate telescope that I can imagine would be a telescope that used the sun as a gravitational lens, so a solar lens. Such a telescope has been proposed many years ago, I think by von Eichelmann and Claudio Marconi proposed the focal mission to ESA. And the basic idea is you put some kind of receiver, a small telescope, can only be like a meter across or something, but you put it at of order of like 1,000 astronomical units from the sun. And the sun's gravitational lensing, focusing, will essentially give you a telescope that has the angular resolution and amplification of that of a telescope which is of order of 1 solar radius in size, which is obviously literally astronomical. So that would be pretty incredible. You'd be able to resolve, rivers and continents and even cities on nearby exoplanets. However, flying to 1,000 AU is very, very difficult. I mean, this is way beyond the orbit of Pluto. So it's kind of where Planet 9 most likely lives, if there is such a thing. So it's really, really far out there. And of course, you can only really look at what's directly behind the sun, and wherever you put your telescope, that's it. You're kind of fixed more or less to look at that one system that you design your telescope for. I think a better, more practical idea, one that I've talked about on this channel before, is the terrascope, where you use the Earth. And the difference is that you use the Earth not as a gravitational lens, but as an atmospheric lens. You use refraction through the Earth's atmosphere. So this has some downsides because the Earth's atmosphere is not crisp like gravity. You have different currents in the atmosphere. You have different thermal gradients, things like this, which will distort the image. And so in that paper, I didn't really make a claim that you could use the terrascope as something for direct imaging necessarily to actually resolve small structures. Although in principle you could with maybe laser adaptive optics. I can imagine that being possible. Instead, in that paper, we really focus on the amplification. You just get this sheer kind of photon counting benefit. So that would be my dream telescope, especially given that I guess I had the idea for it. That would be particularly nice to see. I think a telescope that NASA actually have on the cards that could happen, and I'm very excited about, would be something like the Habitable Worlds Observatory, HWO. I am a little bit depressed about the size of HWO. It's only planned to be about 6.5 meters, and of course the budget just got eviscerated in the last White House proposal. So at this rate, it might not even happen. I would like to see something like that though, a telescope that's going to plan to take a photo of another nearby, eventually Earth-like exoplanet. That would be the dream. I would love in my lifetime to see, even if it's just 1 pixel, the pale blue dot of another potentially living world. I would die happy if we saw that scientifically in my lifetime, and it is realizable. We have the technology to pull that off. It will not be easy. It will require some development, but I think we can do it. It's definitely not fantasy to do that. I will also say, this isn't really a telescope, but Europa Clipper, or even better, a Europa submersible, not a telescope. I know that's not a telescope, but a space mission. That would also be probably equally awesome for me to see images and maybe fish, who knows, swimming around in the ocean of Europa. I mean, that would be mind-blowing. So, on my wish list of the 2 most incredible missions, that would have to be up there as well. How has your YouTube channel influenced your day-to-day work in academia? Love the channel. Congrats on 1 million subs. Yeah, it definitely has had an impact. I think having a somewhat successful YouTube channel here as an academic is obviously a bit unusual. When I make the videos, I never really imagine that an academic, a colleague of mine, is going to watch them. I always design them for the public, design them for you guys to watch them. And I'm trying to convey the message in often a simplified language, trying to boil it down to something that's easy to understand. And sometimes, when a colleague watches that, they can get kind of annoyed with that simplification, right? Because maybe you're not being quite as precise as possible with the language and the precision that you would normally use in an academic environment. And that can lead to maybe frustrations sometimes, but I don't shy from that because they are not my audience. You are my audience. I'm trying to talk to the interested layperson, the public who really want to learn about astronomy, not my colleagues. But it does lead to a kind of a double-edged sword. Sometimes I will be critical of work out there, and those colleagues will see those criticisms and they're not going to like it. And I've even been accused sometimes of doing academic bullying by criticizing papers here on YouTube. And it's not my intention to bully anyone, of course. But at the same time, I think if I'm going to be authentic as a science communicator, I have to provide my opinion about when I think something is wrong. It doesn't mean you have to agree with me, but I think I have to be honest about when I think something is wrong.
First of all, how dare you? Second of all, if you're going to go by the
read your paper?
But because of the huge platform of having, I guess now 1 million subscribers in parts, I definitely understand why someone on the receiving end of that would not see it the same way. So it does kind of put you in a bind as a active researcher / science communicator. I always think that was great to be doing both, but honestly, it is a difficult tightrope to walk sometimes. There are other benefits. I think, obviously having the support of many of our donors to the Cool Worlds Lab has offered us a kind of level of financial freedom. We can explore innovative, exciting projects that maybe are not possible to get through federal funding, especially right now with the federal crisis going on. But overall, it is a tremendous gift, and I think also a source of great ideas. Many of you ask incredible questions. I love engaging with you in the comment section, and it often gives me new ideas. You ask for, hey, what about this? Have you thought about doing a video on that? I'll do the research for that video, and then I'll start getting new ideas for new papers. So there is a very strong synergy between doing science communication and doing research, and I hope I can maintain that for years to come. Congrats. My question is, what is your most unscientific belief held? Well, I've really got to answer this one because it has 222 votes. It's the most upvoted question on the AMA, so it's going to be a tricky one to answer as a scientist, but I think that's what makes it a great question. I think probably the answer is a question of self-belief, almost faith. Science really shuns away from faith, right? We're supposed to be doing evidence-based reasoning, so faith really doesn't have any part in what we're doing. But if you are going to embark on a career to become an astrophysicist, I mean, when I was at college, even at school, I never imagined I would be capable of being a professor at an Ivy League school. To me, that was just pure fantasy. Of course, I would have loved it. It would have been a dream, but I never thought it was realizable for myself to reach that goal. Maybe other people said that to me, but I didn't believe that. And so I kind of had to had this kind of superpower. I had to play this game, had to play this trick where I sort of insisted I could do it and sort of put the override switch on. I think that's really what I'm getting at. This override switch that even though I have no evidence whatsoever that I can possibly do this, I have to insist that I can. And I know that the more I insist it's true in my brain, I'm almost reprogramming myself to make it happen. And I think that is it often comes across as almost like an arrogance. And some of my friends I remember at college would say, where do you get this kind of totally unjustified level of self-belief that you can do these things? And they weren't wrong. I had no clear evidence or justification for believing I could do these wacky ideas or things that I'd come out with. But I think that's why I did it, because I knew I wouldn't be able to achieve these things unless I tricked myself into thinking I could. So, I kind of treat my brain almost like a computer where I'm the programmer. I'm going to rewrite the code to make this possible. So maybe that is a little bit scientific, but also I think it is truly an act of faith to insist that you can do it despite the fact there's no evidence to support it. And that is anti-scientific. If not space, what would you have studied? Oh, I love that question. I mean, it's hard because I think one of the things I love doing is learning, and I think many of us do. And so it's hard to pick one thing to focus on because there's so much fascinating stuff in the world around us, in nature around us, in human history and economics. So that's tough. I mean, I have flirted many a time with different career paths, such as being a doctor. I remember at college, I thought about, not maybe so seriously, but I did think about transferring to a medical degree. I was enjoying physics a lot, but I felt like it was just a selfish thing, to be honest. I think when you study astronomy and physics, the returns are there. There are real returns to the things we do. Even basic research, foundational kind of fundamental science, I think still has a return, but that return is often decades or even centuries ahead, as we've spoken about in this channel before. Whereas a doctor, there's that very visceral, at least this was my illusion, maybe a doctor would disagree with me, but there's this visceral illusion that it would be an immediate return. You would save people's lives, you'd make people feel better, and you would have comfort in the fact that you were in a definitive way making society better. And that was very attractive to me. I also wanted to be an astronaut when I was a kid, like many of the people. I guess that's still kind of space, though, to be fair. I thought about working in intelligence and code cracking. I love codes and mathematics as a kid as well, so that was something that I was drawn to. But if I was to sort of do a second degree now, at this point in my life, I think the subjects I'm interested in are history, anthropology, and really together kind of the story of humanity. I'd love to know the future of this. Like, how does the human story end? What is our destiny on this planet? Do we ever leave this cradle? Do we one day peter out? Or do we eventually figure out our problems and blossom into a mature civilization? I'd love to know the end of the story. But I think even asking, how do we get to where we are now, seems like a miracle. The fact is, the world seems so unstable. Humans seem so polarized and tribal. It is astonishing in so many ways that we got as far as we did. And what are the lessons from how we did that? Is there some lessons there for the future? So I care very deeply about humans, about the human story, and about our species. And it fascinates me, and I would love to learn more about our own story. As a newer subscriber, do you mind summarizing your backstory from academic background to how this channel became a thing? Wow, I definitely can't accurately summarize that entire journey of 40 years at this point in a nice glib 1-minute answer. And maybe it should be a topic of a future video, actually. I'd be happy to talk about it. If that's interesting to you guys, let me know. But the CV version, I suppose, is that I studied physics at Cambridge University, natural sciences, in brackets physics, that's what they call it. And I wasn't really aiming at astronomy at that time. I always loved space, but I just thought physics was more the thing for me at that point in my career. But towards the end, I started to hear about exoplanets being discovered. And there weren't that many then. I think probably of order of like 20 or so exoplanets had been found. And I thought, that's for me. It just seemed incredibly exciting that in the space of a few years, we had doubled the number of exoplanets. It felt like this was a boom area. And as a young researcher, that's what you want. You want to get into a field that's just unlocking, because you can have influence, you can make a difference in this new wave of discovery. So that really drew me to it. And then I started a PhD at University College London. I was supposed to be, I did work with Giovanna Tonetti, a brilliant professor there. But she studies atmospheres of exoplanets. And as you may know, I don't really do atmospheres that much. I dabble, but it's not really my expertise. And I remember the first few weeks of study at UCL, I had this huge textbook on radiative transfer. My advisor, it was actually another advisor as well, Alan Aylward, who'd put on my desk. And they said, work through this radiative transfer textbook. I was working through it and I was like, man, this is pretty boring. This is not what I imagined for exoplanets. And on the side, I had another kind of idea for a paper, and this came about from a trip to the Himalayas. I was climbing the summer before and had a lot of free time to myself, which is a very long story to explain why I had so much free time. There's an interesting story there. I just don't have time to explain it. And I had basically cooked up a kind of new theory, almost, of a new model of transits. And it was really a model which could account for eccentric orbits, which remarkably didn't really exist at the time. Most of the calculations at the time assumed circular orbits because that's what we have in the solar system. And so I made this leap of just saying, hey, what if we allow for elliptical orbits? And I put it on my advisor's desk, and I think she was expecting me to talk about radiative transfer. And to her credit, she saw it and said, you should do this. This is clearly your calling. And she gave me incredible support to just kind of pursue my own ideas. With her support, for sure. Lots of bouncing ideas back and forth with her, but she really supported me. So I was extremely fortunate to have a very talented and generous advisor in that sense. I think we all need great teachers in our careers to help us reach our full potential. And so eventually, I continued this journey. I went to Harvard as a Sagan Fellow during my postdoc, started thinking about, looking for exomoons during both my thesis and during that time. And then after, probably 5-6 years at Harvard, I eventually got a professorship at Columbia University, which was a wonderful moment for me to, finally get a tenure track job, which is a big deal in academia to make that step. And I remember when I interviewed at Columbia, I said, look, if I come here, one of the things I want to do is start a YouTube channel and talk about the research I'm doing, talk about exoplanets, talk about all the stuff that fascinates me. And I think they didn't take it that seriously. I think they were like, okay, whatever, maybe a few hundred people will watch it, or it'll probably fizzle out after a year or two. YouTube wasn't, YouTube was a thing, but academics on YouTube was not really a thing back then. So I said, I'm going to do it, and I did it. After a year after starting my job, I started the YouTube channel. The early videos were embarrassing. I think that's what the journey all creators have. I still feel that way about a lot of my videos, to be honest, but I do think I've improved over time. And it's just been this journey of continuing to see it grow. There's, as a creator, there's definitely ups and downs. There's the pressure of making consistently better and better content is pretty hard, of doing new original things like this AMA, I suppose, today is a little bit different to usual. But also serving what your community wants and why they became subscribers in the first place. So there's always that resistance against experimentation in a sense from your core audience, but a desire internally to try different things. And at the same time, you get lows in your subscriber count and, things don't seem to be progressing as fast as you want. And then other times it explodes and goes viral and you don't really understand why that happened. So it's been a fascinating journey. I don't really know why Cool World has become hit 1 million subscribers, but I'm extremely grateful to all of you who've supported us and got us to this point. So 2 questions here. What's something you absolutely suck at? And have you ever had an experience that shook or changed your sense of reality? Oh, suck at? Well, where to begin? Just ask my wife, right? There's a very, very long list of things which I am not high achieving at. Making the bed, folding the laundry, any of that kind of stuff, is not really my expertise. Organization, I'm famously bad at organization. And, even setting up meetings, I do everything last minute, keeping up with emails, logistical tasks. I've booked holidays to completely wrong destinations. I'm terrible at any kind of event planning activity. And I guess it's probably not so much a case that I'm intrinsically bad at it. I just don't like doing it so much that I put in the minimum effort to it is probably a more honest answer. And I just want to focus on the things I enjoy doing, like these videos and doing research and all the other fun things in life. But folding laundry is probably not high my priority list. So that's something I'd say I definitely suck at. In terms of an experience that shook me or changed my sense of reality, it probably comes back to my time. I can give a few examples, but I think one clear one in my mind is kind of falling whilst climbing and not knowing how high I was and the sense of I could die here. Again, this is a long story and a story, if you want to hear, I'm happy to tell in another video. But yeah, I think that sense of this could be it. I think I might die here. And I bet some of you have had that experience. It really does change your worldview quite a bit. It makes you think about what you're doing with your life, what's important to you, and how to use the time that you have left, because you just see how precious it is, and it can happen at any moment. You never know. And also, I guess, to make better decisions, not to take so many risks as I think I did as a young person. Certainly physically in my body, I was probably taking risks that I shouldn't have. So yeah, I think that was a profound moment. Okay, 2 questions here. What is your take on the whole crisis in physics commentary going viral these days? And what is your favorite planet or moon from any science fiction universe? 2 is a lot easier than 1, I think, to answer that one. 2, I think I'd have to say Pandora, probably from Avatar. Hey, I'm Mr. Exomoon, so of course an exomoon is going to be the answer. And just purely for the fact that the CGI was so incredible. It kind of blows you away how realistic that thing looks. But for the more spicy one, the crisis in physics, I think this means different things to different people, but I think most of the commentary that I've seen, the physics is doing a lot of heavy lifting there. They don't really mean all of physics. They don't mean astronomy. They don't mean condensed matter physics. I think most of the criticism seems to be aimed, in my reading, at theoretical physics, and in particular sort of foundational physics, the theories of everything type stuff. The goal to unify general relativity and quantum mechanics in particular doesn't seem to have made a lot of progress since the 1970s when string theory arrived. Doesn't seem like we've had any revolutions or proofs since then. And I get that, but I don't think it's true. So it depends how you look at it. There have certainly been some really remarkable advances in theoretical physics. This is not my wheelhouse. I'm not a theoretical physicist. But certainly from the outside, it seems like the progress has been quite profound in various ways. I mean, think about Maldaceni's ADS-CFT correspondence paper. That paper has now been cited over 20,000 times. I think it's now the most cited theoretical physics paper ever written. That is a pretty profound impact by any definition. It has spawned entire subdisciplines, essentially, of people studying the holographic principle as a result of this. And I think it's profoundly changed the way we think about paradoxes like the black hole information paradox. And similarly, you think about like Lenny Suskind's work with the ER equals EPR correspondence. Those papers have had enormous impact in theoretical physics, but I agree they are not theories of everything, if that's what you're looking for. And string theory does kind of claim to be a true unification of quantum mechanics and general relativity. And I think many people feel like it has underdelivered. And I think, to be honest with you, to give a really thoughtful answer about that criticism, I would want to study it and look into it and speak to a lot more people on this topic. I'm a little bit worried it's become almost like a hot topic, a hot take to throw in and just kind of crap all over string theory or whatever it is. But for me, it is a tiny, tiny slither of physics. String theory is a tiny, tiny slither of physics. There are hardly any full-time faculty who are employed who only work on string theory. Or if I'd even do a touch string theory, it's a tiny, tiny fraction. The real... I think this is almost like a psyops. Focusing on whether string theory is correctly delivered or not is kind of a complete distraction from the real crisis that is actually happening. And that is that science is under assault right now. There is a total evisceration of the science budgets happening in the US. And yes, that's just the US, and maybe China's not being affected by these cuts, but we are seeing 3 times less funding for astrophysics, as I spoke about last video. That is a crisis by any definition for the future of making progress in astrophysics and fundamental physics as well. And even globally, it's going to be a huge impact because the US does the heavy lifting for the entire world. We are the leaders scientifically, and I don't think that's a case of the world benefits from us. We get, the patents. We get all those brilliant people work for us. We get those graduate students that train our departments and then go out and start up companies and become these brilliant people in our society. So, the benefit is ours by having this work happen here. So, look, we could talk about that all day, but I think the real crisis is not so much a problem with string theory, which has its own problems for sure, but that's not the big. It's kind of like worrying about a molehill in the garden when your house is on fire. It's just a bit of a distraction, and I get why YouTubers like talking about it, because it makes for a nice kind of poppy, fun, contrarian position. But I would much rather, to be honest, science communicator YouTubers really call out this dire situation that we're in with the funding situation. So 2 questions here. Do you think we will be able to confirm life elsewhere in the universe in our lifetime? And 2, which problems of physics do you think we will solve in our lifetime? Yeah, the life problem, it's hard to say. I mean, I've gone on the record as saying, and I will say it again, I am totally willing to accept the possibility, not saying this is true, but it is a possibility that we might be alone in the universe, not even in the galaxy. There may not be any microbial life on any of the planets in our galaxy. I know a lot of people really struggled to wrap their head around that, so you should see my video, Why We Might Be Alone in the Universe, to get the full reason as to why I think that is a plausible possibility. And so if I give that just, 50-50 odds, life, no life, just as a sort of agnostic position, then of course I have to be open to the idea that we will not answer the question, because you can't prove a negative. No matter how many experiments we do, no matter how many plans we service, we're getting no, that will never prove that there is no life in the universe. You can't prove the negative. All you can do is prove the positive by eventually getting a positive detection. And I suspect we'll hear of positive detections, and those will come under intense scrutiny, as has already happened, and some of those will evaporate. Some of those will be more intriguing. We'll plan follow-up missions to try and learn more about them, and maybe it'll take decades to truly get the answers as to whether we truly believe life is out there or not. I think the much easier case would be a techno-signature in many ways, but maybe the more probable case, because it requires an extra step of so much evolution to get to a techno-signature, it's probably going to be a biosignature is the most likely claim. And I think it's going to be a real toss-up. I hope it happens. I'm an optimist in terms of I would like it to be true, but I'm a agnostic in terms of my scientific disciplining myself to remain unbiased on this question. And then for 2, what problems in physics do you think we'll solve in our lifetime? I think the Hubble tension is really starting to crack, like lambda CDM, our standard model of cosmology. There are clearly several cracks now in this model. They're all above, like 5 to 3 sigma level, so sort of above the noise floor of just, this is just coincidence. And that makes it super intriguing. So I do think our fundamental understanding of what dark energy is, or how it behaves, or if it's even there at all, I think that will probably transform in the next 20, 30 years. But of course, that's only going to happen if we keep having more and more cosmology experiments. We're not going to make any more progress unless we can get better data, because 3 sigma, a hint of something breaking at 3 sigma is great, but it's not enough to really understand what's going on until you start getting to basically like the 25 sigma level. So we definitely need much more precise experiments to make that happen. So a bunch of questions here asking about the status of our search for exomoons around the planet Kepler-167 using the James Webb Space Telescope. So you might remember when I made that video that announced that we had been selected and we're getting data. In fact, we were collecting data. I was careful to say that we were not going to give updates, just status updates along every step. I know that's a little bit frustrating, but I think it's really important to communicate science when we know when we've actually dotted the I's and crossed the T's, and not sort of give you the whole roller coaster at every step, because frankly, it would just be exhausting. And it has been a roller coaster. I can tell you that. We have had an immense battle with this data set. I'll say that. It has been a huge learning curve, figuring out new things about the data as we go. Before we even got the data, we sort of thought we had all of our ducks in a row. We had got all of these pipelines ready, and we were sort of in a position where we could just press go and have the light curve made, and we actually did that the first day we got the data. Good news is we saw this big, beautiful planetary transit straight away. In fact, 2 planetary transits, because Kepler-167c, which is a super-Earth, also transits during our observations. So, the data looks really nice at first glance, but then when you really dial in, and our proposal has to dial in because we are trying to push James Webb to a really challenging level of precision. We're trying to push it to its absolute limits of what it can do. That's what we need in order to detect moons that are the same size as Ganymede, as Callisto, Titan, things like that. So we have to push the data hard. And so I'd say for the first few months, that was what we were working on. How could we squeeze more juice out of the data? Because what came out of the TIM, what came out of the standard pipelines was just not quite at the level that we needed. But we crossed that battle. I think we mostly did that. We now have pipelines that can, through various experimentation and deeper understanding what's really going on, we think we can get down to that level of precision that we need. But then the next question is, do you believe everything you see? Because you can see stuff in the data, which maybe you might convince yourself, well, maybe that could be an exomoon or something. And the algorithms maybe might think that. But that doesn't mean it is, because stars are active. They can have faculae, inhomogeneities on their surface, star spots. And so we want to be careful that, anything we see is really truly an exomoon and not something else. And similarly, the instrument itself, it's often said that when you study astronomical data like this, you learn more about the telescope than you do about the stars. And that definitely feels true in this project. So we've been working extremely hard. I can't tell you what a battle this has been. It has been the hardest data science challenge of my life working on this with Ben, and I think we both feel that way. But we have made tremendous progress on it, and I am optimistic that we will fulfill our original goals of looking for exomoons. I'm not going to tell you whether we have hints or not. Either way, that's something you're just going to have to wait for when the paper comes out. But I am optimistic that we will meet our goals of conducting a search around this planet at a level of precision that's not been achieved before. So this question comes from one of my supporters on the Discord. Have you ever thought about giving up on astronomy after a setback, like an unexpected poor grade, or even getting a data set that turned out to be much noisier than you thought? Yeah, certainly actually the current JWST data set feels that way. At least it did for a while. And I certainly think during this recent project, there's been times when I wanted to stop because it's hard to go in to the office every day and work on the same damn data set day in, day out, every hour for months at a time. That is kind of exhausting. It's exhilarating when you first get the data because it's like a fresh new puppy to play with. But after 6 months of staring at that same data, it starts to get really tedious. When you're working on, the centroid positions and the details of each individual pixel's behavior, that stuff starts to get that's not why any of us became an astronomer, was to study the behavior of individual pixels on the James Webb detector. That's just not something that excites me, but it's a means to an end. We have to do it in order to get to our science goal. But I don't give up because, this is, I understand that it is something that we have to do in order to get to this dream. But I have certainly felt that way. And, earlier on in my career, I will say as a student at Cambridge University, when I was studying natural sciences, physics, after my first year, I did not have good grades. I think I was on a 2-2, which is kind of often called the drinker's degree. And it was an apt description of my first year because I was turning up to lectures most of the time, but not always. I think most of the lectures I would turn up to, but I just really wasn't studying outside of that. I was doing like the minimum on my homework assignments. Many a time I would turn up to supervision problem set classes without anything to show because I just had been partying the whole time. And so I was just immature. When I was an 18-year-old kid at Cambridge University, I was more interested in chasing girls, going out drinking, partying with my friends than I was training to become a physicist. I loved physics, but the social explosion when you first arrive on campus as a young person can be pretty intoxicating as well. And so I think I really kind of screwed up that first year. And I actually had my director of studies, he took me aside after the first year and he said, look, you're on a 2-2. Are you sure this is what you want to do? Maybe you should think about quitting. Maybe you should think about transferring to the university, doing something else. And I want you to resit these exams at a minimum. And not only do you have to resit the exams, but you have to get a first, which is, obviously the top grade. And I was on a 2-2, so that seemed pretty challenging. And I was going to have to do this all by myself without any professor's help and all this kind of stuff. So that was a big challenge. But I remember going home and I would sit on the lawn outside in my parents' house. And I remember I sat out there for hours just thinking about this and what I really wanted and deciding that I wouldn't give up and that I had spent my entire childhood dreaming of space and physics, and it would be crazy to let this opportunity go because of horsing around was more interesting to me. So I studied really hard over the summer. I got a first and continued more diligently for the rest of my academic career. And I just think it was a great warning shot. It's a warning shot of how easy it is that you can work really hard to get to this dream position. I mean, getting into Cambridge University was a dream undergraduate position. And then when you get there, you can think that you're done and you can take your foot off the gas and be like, okay, I made it. Now I can party and relax. It doesn't stop. The grind never stops. It just keeps going. And it's a habit. It's like training yourself that this isn't something you do temporarily to get where you want to get to. If you want to be continuously successful, you have to continually push your entire life, your entire career. And so that really became a philosophy of mine throughout my career. And I have to say, I enjoy it. I enjoy doing the hard work. But obviously that comes with certain sacrifices. Maybe you won't be able to go out drinking with your friends every night, but yeah, you can still go on a Saturday night and have a drink now and again. But you just can't maybe party around quite as much as I was in the first year of college. What are your philosophical beliefs/ideas of the universe that you have no real data to support, but just have a hunch about? Yeah, I'm going to give you a fairly short answer on this one. I'd say it's the idea, and I think I've spoken about this in the channel before, the idea that the Earth has just passed what I call the Great Intelligence Event. So we sometimes talk about the Great Oxidation Event that happened in the Earth's history. It was about 2 billion years ago, 2.5 billion years ago. And it's this event where the Earth sort of transitioned from being having no oxygen in the atmosphere, or a very, very small amount, to suddenly having sort of measurable, 10, 20% level in the atmosphere. And that allowed for the evolution of more complex animals, such as eventually ourselves on this planet. So that was a fundamental evolutionary change to our planet, a kind of a almost Gaian-like synergy between the planetary atmosphere and life that lived on it. And it really did open the doors for evolution going forward. And I have this hunch that the evolution of intelligent life on this planet, not that it's necessarily a likely thing to happen, I want to be clear about that. It may be that you replay the tape and the vast majority of the time you don't get to intelligence, but we have intelligence now. I think that's really my point. Intelligence has happened, and I think it would be very difficult to eradicate. That's my bold, unsubstantiated claim, because of course I can't substantiate it because we'd have to do the experiment of trying to eradicate life on the planet, which I don't want to do. But yeah, I kind of think of not just humanity, but all forms of intelligence on this planet. Bottlenose dolphins, humpback whales, even birds, octopus. I think there's many forms of intelligence on this planet at this point in the animal kingdom, which are all, of course, somewhat related to each other. And I think it would be very, very difficult for an event to occur, unless it just completely eradicated all life on the planet, that would remove intelligence and we'd go back to some sort of more simple, dumb life on this planet going forward. In a nutshell, I think my claim is that a civilization will probably reemerge. In fact, I would guess multiple times on this planet. And so I think that's an interesting idea, because it means we have an opportunity to communicate with another intelligent civilization, a non-human civilization, but it's just not extraterrestrial. It's a terrestrial future civilization. But we could communicate with them through time by leaving time capsules. by leaving information for them to discover. We'd have to think carefully about how it could be preserved, because there's 1 billion years left on the clock for the Earth, for complex life. So it's hard to build something that can last for 1 billion years, but maybe on the moon or something we can imagine, or on orbit of the Earth. But I think there is a fascinating opportunity to actually engage in I'd say this is our best chance, in fact, of communicating with another civilization. I'll put it that way. And so this idea I find really fun and intriguing, but yeah, I totally don't have an evidence to really support it beyond a hunch that I think we are just going to be difficult to get rid of. Okay, a triple threat here of questions asking really, what is my solution to the Fermi paradox? Well, first off, I wouldn't claim to have a solution. And ultimately, as scientists, as I've said, talking about in the Why We Might Be Alone video, it is our job not to decide what the answer is. So I'm a little bit hesitant to even directly answer it, because we've seen that mistake happen before in science. You've heard me talk about Percival Lowell. One of my favorite, I love this story. The story of Percival Lowell, this 19th century astronomer who was convinced that Mars had life on it. He just thought, well, life must be everywhere. That's always his philosophy of life. And so he pointed a telescope at Mars. What did he see? He saw these streaks, and he thought there must be canals, because of course that's a signature of life. So we have to be very careful not to inject our own biases when we look out. And so truly, as a scientist, wearing my scientist hat, the answer is I don't know what the solution to the Fermi paradox is. My job is just simply to go out there, collect evidence, do the surveys, and try and figure it out. Now, if you're asking about a personal hunch, that's maybe less scientific, and I'm allowed to sort of speculate a little bit with that big grain of salt. I think it's a little bit depressing, but I think by Occam's razor, the simplest explanation tends to be the right one. And so you might imagine something like the zoo hypothesis, where you have this contrivance of thousands or even just a few civilizations who are organizing themselves in a way to ensure that we do not receive any signals from them, we don't see any indication of them whatsoever in the sky. You could imagine such a conspiracy, but it's contrived. It requires more moving parts to it than the much simpler explanation that there is just no one out there. That's a little bit depressing of a position to have, and it's not what I want to be true, because that's almost like a third answer. What do I want to be true? What I want to be true is that there are lots of civilizations out there, and I don't know, for whatever reason, they just don't use radio or something. They're just using things that we just don't even think of. And so we just have to wait until we hit the right medium to actually communicate with them. I hope that's the case. I'd be surprised if that's true. It'd be a little bit odd if no other alien civilization out there thought of radio. It's such an obvious way of communicating. If you want to say hello, it travels at the speed of light, faster than anything else. It requires not much energy. It would be peculiar. You can send a lot of information via radio. That's why we invented it. So I would be surprised if that's the case, but it would be nicer. I think the more simple answer is the depressing one, that there's probably no other technological civilizations in our galaxy. But as a tiny little silver lining to add onto that depressing answer, I would say I'm talking about right now. Right now, there might not be anyone present, but I am much more open to the idea that there could have been past civilizations in our galaxy, and maybe they have long died out at this point, but there may be signatures of those civilizations, some relics out there, some artifacts for us to discover, which could still be packed full of information. And so that would be, I think, the more likely contact scenario, in my opinion. So we've got a whole bunch of questions here asking really about my inspiration, like what triggered me to get into astronomy in the first place. It's really hard for me to remember a time in my life where I wasn't captivated by the stars. It just feels like that's always been true. I've always been nerding out about planets and stars in the universe and potentially alien life. I remember when I was 5 or 6 years old, my parents gave me this big, beautiful book about the planets. It's like an encyclopedia of the planets. And I remember looking at Jupiter compared to the Earth, the size comparison, and just my mind being blown as this little kid, looking at the number of moons that Jupiter had, some moons of which were comparable size almost to that of the Earth. I remember memorizing their names, their masses, their radii, their orbital separations, And I just could not get enough of it. Maybe that's why I ended up looking for exomoons one day because of that connection. But I just found the planets amazing and the potential that these weren't just imaginings. These things are really there. I remember looking through a telescope at Saturn's rings as a young child and just thinking, this isn't just a picture. That thing's in the sky. I can see it. Imagine what else might be out there. I mean, that was mind-blowing. But as I said, I feel like that's always been a part of my childhood. As I got a bit older, Star Trek, The Next Generation was on TV at the time. Man, I loved Star Trek Next Generation. Any regular viewer of the channel knows that because almost every episode of Cool Worlds will probably have some kind of reference or meme or a little clip from TNG. But yeah, that's my bag, TNG, growing up. Man, I love that show.
I'm a role model.
And then, it's starting to get a little bit more serious about science. I think it was probably reading non-science fiction books. I think science fiction I enjoyed, but non-science fiction books are really what inspired me. And as I said, I kind of had this transformation as a young person, especially when I discovered particle physics. In these books and quantum physics, my mind was just blown again, like a second epiphany in my life. And I thought, this is what I want to do. I want to learn about the nature of the universe. I want to know how things work. And here is a key to unlock a door to figure that out. Science. And that's what I want to do. I never really thought that I would get to a point where I would do it for a career. It was a pure fantasy at that point that could happen. But even just learning about it was amazing. What a wonderful time we live in when we have so many questions answered, which hundreds of years ago people just had no idea about. And yet at the same time, there are still so many things we don't know that our imaginations can have a lot of fun there. What advice would you give to men who are depressed and struggling to find their way in life? Well, first off, I'm really sorry. I'm guessing by that question that this is a struggle that you yourself have been facing. I know many people are facing this struggle. And, I'm really sorry to hear that might be a problem that you're dealing with. I will say I'm very cognizant of it. I'm very aware of it. Obviously, as a lived experience as a man in this world, I certainly know what you're talking about. And I am a parent and I have a young boy who is 7 years old now. He's appeared in, I think, 2 of the videos in the past. And obviously he's only 7, but he will one day grow into a man. And I'm thinking, and my daughter as well, will grow into a woman. And, I think there are unique challenges in this world, but it's certainly something I'm aware of that we don't probably talk enough, I don't think, about the problems that men are facing. There are lots and lots of bigger problems in the world, probably, wars in this world, the threat of nuclear annihilation, climate change, poverty, starvation across the planet. But, the problems of depression of men in this country and elsewhere in the modern world are a very serious one, and one that we should definitely address and talk about. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a therapist. I can't tell you how to get out of a funk. I think probably talking to an expert, a therapist, is one of the best things you can do. I can tell you some of the things that have worked for me, although in total transparency, I've never experienced a really deep depression in my life. I've had moments where I felt flat and low, but I wouldn't characterize any of those moments as a deep depression that I've seen in my close friends and family sometimes have to go through. But the things, despite that have worked for me, I think one, when you're going through a low period, is to focus on things that you can take control of. And the things that you can usually take control of are things related to your health and your physical being, what you eat. And so for me, focusing on my diet, focusing on exercise, what I consume, both, not just in terms of the food, but in terms of also what you drink and the content even you ingest when you're online. All of that affects your well-being in a physical sense, and secondary, in a kind of mental sense, what you consume in terms of social media, alcohol, drugs, those all can have another big effect on your health. So sort of going clean living, taking control of your life, it might not be something you do for the rest of your life. Maybe you'll have a period where you just take control and you go clean for a while and then you find more of a balance later on. But I certainly think having a period where you just like, this is it, I'm going to do this one simple thing of walking 10,000 steps a day. And if I achieve that, it's a win. And getting out of those lows is often about finding a series of wins. And those wins can be small. Walking 10,000 steps a day is not a big win in the giant scheme of the universe, but it can be a huge win for you personally because you are proving to yourself that your life is under your control. You get to choose what is going to happen. You can choose whether you walk 10,000 steps or not. You can choose whether you're going to eat clean. You can choose how many drinks a day you have, right? You get that choice. And it's not easy to make that choice because you have to make sacrifices. You have to have the discipline and the will to push through those temptations and addictions. But if you can prove to yourself you can take control of those small things, it empowers you to take control of bigger things step by step. Okay, a couple of questions here. What advice would you give to a young adult who's passionate about space exploration but is starting to feel discouraged? And as a student, something I'd ask is, what is your undergraduate and PhD programs like? How did you get through them day by day? And then also, how did you decide what to specialize in? So there's a lot to unpack in these questions. So I'm going to sort of group them together as a career advice type question. For me, astronomy was a calling. It really was. Like I just wanted to learn about the stars and the universe so deeply, so passionately that any of the choice just kind of felt crazy. Yeah, sure, I could do a degree in engineering. I remember a lot of my friends at school did that. We certainly had lots of teachers at the time at school advise us on that. You get a great paying job, nice and safe, plenty of careers in that direction. And that's good advice if you want to play it safe. But it might not satisfy you. And I think pursuing astronomy is obviously in some sense a risk because there's only, I think it's a crazy number. It's like 10,000 astronomers, professional astronomers on the Earth. So out of 10 billion people or so, what's the chance that you're going to be one of those? I never thought that was going to happen for me. That I'd never thought if I do a degree in physics or even a PhD in astronomy, it is likely that I will end up in a permanent job in astronomy. I never thought that. That's not the reason why I did it. The reason why I did it is because I loved the subject and I couldn't imagine not doing it. It's like, why do you want to play in the NBA or why do you want to try and play in the Premier League? It's not necessarily logical that you think you're going to get to that point, but you really love playing the game so much that you kind of want to give it a go despite the risk. And maybe unlike playing in the NBA or playing soccer, although you definitely get great skills in all sorts of walks of life by doing those things, astronomy is sort of unique in that you gain so many skills that are highly desirable in the workplace. I mean, you get to learn coding, you get to do analytical thinking, problem solving, you become an expert in how to communicate your research, at reading the literature. So it really is a very multifaceted degree. You become an expert in a large number of skills. And that makes you, I think, very employable in the modern workplace. Maybe that won't be true in 20, 30 years. I don't know. Who knows how the workplace is going to change at the rate things are going, but I certainly think right now it's still an invaluable set of skills that you get from an astronomy degree, an astrophysics degree, even a physics degree. All of those things, you're going to get a great skill set. So I think it's a win-win situation. You get to pursue something you love with the possibility, like buying a lottery ticket, that it might work out. And if it doesn't work out, you're still probably going to get a great career at the end of it. And you're going to be a more interesting person for the rest of your life because you will know a lot of astronomy. And, that next cocktail party, you will be able to impress people with your knowledge of astrophysics. So it is kind of a win-win for me. In terms of choosing a specific subject, I think for me that was kind of a sense of opportunism, like sort of feeling where was the big questions, the big developments happening in astronomy. Exoplanets felt like something where there was a transformation happening in the field. There was this new wave of discovery. We only knew at the time of a few dozen. It was kind of exploding very quickly. As a young person, it felt like there was an opportunity to make a difference in that field. So that was very attractive. And then I think also just for me personally, it calls back to those original aspirations I had as a child, thinking about astronomy, thinking about the planets, of just wondering if there was other creatures out there in the universe. That was always a question, an itch in the back of my mind more than any other. And so it just made total natural sense for me to connect those two pieces together and to focus on exoplanets. So linking together a passion and also thinking about the growth areas, I think can be the perfect match for choosing an opportunity. All right, so I'm going to try and speed up a little bit. So let's just take the first of these two questions. What do you think of current efforts to extend human health span? And in your opinion, would it be good if we can stop and reverse the aging process entirely? Well, mortality is scary. I mean, especially if you're an atheist and you think when you die, that's it. That can feel a little dire. But I often like to remind myself logically that doesn't make any sense, because I wasn't scared. I wasn't terrified. I wasn't in any suffering before I was born. You know, if you go back 9 months before you were even conceived, you had no experience of reality. So why should you fear zero experience after your death? It's the same. I've already been dead for 13.8 billion years in this universe, and I didn't mind it. So maybe I shouldn't really worry too much about how I'll feel, because I won't feel anything after I'm gone either. But of course, as someone alive right now, maybe I might want to have more years of health, and I certainly think that's a very logical thing to want to have. I really want to see my children grow up, and maybe they'll have children one day, and I want to be a part of that. I would hate to live a life where I was deeply unhealthy, like a vegetable state or something. That would be a pretty miserable existence. So, when you look at it in principle, if you could just be like you are now, perfectly healthy indefinitely, and get to participate in all the wonders of seeing both civilization and your family mature and change around you, that sounds pretty exciting. Because I think the probably greatest question I have about humanity is, how does the story end? What happens to our species? Do we flourish? Do we develop further? Or do we take a dark turn? But I think that kind of hints at another darker aspect to an increased health span, because we tend to assume that if I lived longer and was perfectly healthy, everything would be just like it is now. And maybe you're happy with the way things are now, and so that sounds great. But it's not obvious that it will be, right? Things can change to this planet. Things can change to your country, to your freedoms, your rights. Those can all change. And similarly, your experience of reality can also change, even if you're in physical health. I'm really reminded of something Alan Watts wrote and said, I think, and he was talking about why we have children. And he remarked that there's something beautiful about children, and I see it as a parent, that when they see a crack on the wall, they can discover magic in that crack. They can stare at it for hours, following the trail and doing experiments in it, putting sticks in it, putting their fingers in it, and it can really enchant them in a way that an adult would never be interested. An adult will see that same crack in the wall and just walk straight past it and ignore it. Because we've seen it before. We've seen it 1,000 times before. There's nothing new in it. Why would we spend any time looking at it? And a child sees the whole world new, sees everything fresh and exciting. And so every aspect, every time it learns a new phenomena or sees a new thing happen for the first time, it is a transformative experience for that individual. But eventually, you've done it all. There's less and less new experiences to have the longer you've lived. The first time I went to see a NASCAR race for the first time this summer, and it was a really cool experience. But if I'd seen a NASCAR race 1,000,000 times in a row, maybe it might be less interesting at that point, right? The experiences are always the most exciting and exhilarating the first time you have them. And so I do worry that if you lived forever, everything would just become mundane, boring, and uninteresting to you. And I kind of alluded to that a little bit in my Outlasting the Universe video. And so I think it could actually be a kind of torturous experience, and one that could be difficult to escape from, because at a certain point, you might be so used to the idea of living for centuries, millennia by now, that the idea of death becomes a fear that you cannot possibly even contemplate and get over. It becomes an even greater fear than even we have right now. So yeah, it's not obvious to me I don't know the answer, but it's not obvious to me that an increased health span, certainly if it extended for millennia, would be necessarily a pleasant experience. Do you typically eat breakfast or no breakfast? Oh, this would be a nice quick one at last. So generally I eat breakfast. Yeah, I usually have a couple of eggs. I don't eat breakfast when I do cardio. So I usually do cardio 2 days a week. I usually work out about 10:30 in the morning. So on my cardio days, I usually fast and then I'll have a big lunch afterwards. I was doing intermittent fasting for a while where I wouldn't have breakfast all the time. And it was hard. I've just found it quite hard, to be honest. I kind of got mentally cloudy and the evidence seemed to be a little bit all over the place as to how beneficial that was. So in the end, I've gone back to sort of only fasting 2 days a week. Why every scientist, including yourself, describe black holes as having a singularity with infinite density? Well, I don't know that I actually have said that, but maybe you have receipts to prove otherwise. But in any case, to be clear about my current thinking, maybe I made a mistake in the past. My current thinking, and I think a lot of people who study black holes believe this to be the way it probably is, that the singularity is not a point in space. It's not a point of infinite density necessarily. I think the best way to think about it is kind of where the mathematics really breaks down. It's where geodesics, the paths of which light and particles can take, the geodesics end incompletely. I think that's probably the cleanest definition of a singularity. All of these geodesics will converge to a certain point, but it's a point that really exists not necessarily in space, but really in the future. They'll all come to some certain future moment in time. And so maybe the best way to think about a singularity is as a future point in time rather than space. Can you give a few examples of your personal bare minimum evidence to confidently say there is alien life elsewhere? I'm curious what would personally convince you. Well, I think there's two types of life. If it was technological life, I think the answer is actually easier here. And that would be some kind of very complex pattern, such as like a prime number sequence or some mathematical sequence, maybe even like a video file or something that was sent to us. That would have so much information embedded within it. It'd be pretty obvious that a technological civilization must have made it. So I think that's the easiest case. And I've done papers in the past about possible technosignatures with this fun one, I think last year I wrote with Sean Raymond, where we suggested that an advanced civilization could actually change the architecture of their planetary system such that the orbits landed in a resonant chain that was the prime number sequence. It's a little bit fantastical that a civilization could do that, but that would be so unnatural, it would be a dead ringer that somebody had done that. There's no way planets should end up in a prime number sequence. I mean, you can calculate the odds of that happening and just ask how many stars I look at, and you'd soon know whether that was likely a technosignature or not. So that would be pretty convincing. I think the harder question is for simple life, like microbial life. And we're really seeing that play out in real time with the K218b discovery that we talked about a few weeks ago, with this claim of a biosignature, dimethyl sulfide. Before that, we had phosphine with Venus. And before that, we've had methane on Mars. So there's been claims of biosignatures already. It seems to me that and I think Sarah Seeger has said this as well, a professor at MIT, that it's very difficult to see how we could convincingly arrive at a proof of life from a single detection of one of these volatile molecules. It just looks like it'd be very challenging because there's always going to be some way which we haven't thought of that nature could maybe produce that molecule that we didn't know about yet. I mean, it's kind of assuming arrogantly omniscience, that we know of all possible chemical pathways, and of course we don't, because there's trillions upon trillions of chemical pathways that can make things. So I'm a little bit skeptical that's ever going to happen. Yeah, on the Cool Words podcast recently, we had Sarah Walker, who has a more interesting idea, I think, of looking for very complex molecules in the same way that a technosignature is a very complex set of information, like a video that's been sent your way. A molecule can also encode a huge amount of complexity. I mean, our DNA does, for instance. There is no way that DNA should spontaneously form in any environment unless life was manufacturing it, right? So that's a really good indicator of life. The problem is that a heavy molecule like DNA, which has so many elements combined together, would always be non-volatile. It's very difficult to have it be volatile. So you're not going to detect it in the atmosphere, in other words. So that's a little bit of a problem. I'm kind of working on something myself. I don't want to kind of give it away right now, but I think it might be sort of a way of detecting biosignatures that really leverages multitudes rather than thinking about single entities. I think that's all I'll say. So I'm grouping together a bunch of questions here asking about my science fiction book recommendations. Well, the truth is I don't read a lot of science fiction novels. I do enjoy them, but it's not what I gravitate to just because I think, look, I'm already looking for aliens in my day job, so it's kind of like double dipping a little bit. When you come home after a long day of work, you don't really want to be reading about more work. And somehow reading science fiction bizarrely sometimes does feel a little bit that way. So I tend to read other kinds of stuff. Having said that, growing up especially, I did read a lot of different stuff. I remember reading Asimov, and being really blown away by that. Arthur C. Clarke, like those classics, Rendezvous with Rama, stuff like this really took me away. I remember reading the Peter Hamilton space opera series, not such a well-known classic science fiction writer, but I really enjoyed those. And Terry Pratchett, Discworld series, that kind of stuff. So I enjoyed all that. Of course, I spoke recently about the Liu Cixin Three Body series, which I read. So another really intriguing, great series. But yeah, what I tend to read more is fantasy. And in particular, I'm a huge Tolkien nerd, J.R.R. Tolkien. So pretty much every night I go to sleep, the last thing I'll be reading is something by Tolkien. At the moment, I'm working through Unfinished Tales, which I think is the second or third time I've read it. But yeah, I just love kind of recycling through those books and just go through them all. And I like to escape. The last thought I like to have before I go to sleep is escaping to some other realm, some other world. And that just kind of relaxes me and helps me to get some shut-eye. Grouping two questions together here. How far away do you think we are from a working terrascope? And what is the deal with the terrascope? How is this tech not being attempted? Obviously, I'm a little bit biased, but I probably agree with you. I do wish more people were talking about the terrascope. I think it has enormous potential, and I would love to see it be used and tested soon. I can tell you a little bit about what's been happening with it. First, it is difficult to test, simply because you have to fly to about 4 times further away from the Earth than the Moon is. Right? You have to get to one of these Lagrange points. So we do send missions out there, but that's rare. And when we send missions there, they're multi-million-dollar missions. So you need to piggyback a telescope onto one of those missions, which would come with a sizable price tag, and especially just for a first test of something. So that's one caveat. I think more interesting is the idea of using the telescope in reverse. So rather than using it as a telescope, is to use it as a transmitter. So in the same way that the Earth will focus light from a distant star to a single point could broadcast and it would be focused into sort of a collimated beam. So it's essentially like a giant amplifier for your transmitter. And I actually suggested this in the video. I did a video about the Jovoscope. And after I made that video, which is the Jovoscope is exactly this, like using Jupiter, Jovo, as a transmitter. And the Juno spacecraft is in orbit of Jupiter. And interestingly, Juno was supposed to come into this very tight in orbit, but I think there was some kind of engineering problem aboard the spacecraft. They decided that they couldn't risk coming in that close, so they stayed in this very wide elliptical orbit. And at the apogee, the widest point of that orbit, it is far enough away from Jupiter that it would be at the right distance to do this lensing, this Jovoscope effect. So I suggested, I think in that video, hey, why it'd be cool if Juno pinged a radio signal at that time. It would get lensed by Jupiter, come to the Earth, and the equivalent increase in signal to noise would allow us to basically have like 4G LTE speeds at the time, right? So you could basically have like a live stream from Jupiter at that kind of speed. Obviously, it'd be a live stream delayed by like maybe 10 light minutes or something, but you could have a live video feed, so much more data being sent from that kind of distance. That to me is the more easy case to test, because there's a spacecraft already there. You also don't need to worry about blocking out the planet. So when we do the terrascope, you're trying to receive light from a star, but the Earth is also bright. So you have to have some kind of coronagraph essentially to block out the Earth's disk. That makes it maybe a little bit more complicated. But in the Jovoscope case, it should be super easy. And actually, an engineer at JPL, maybe viewing this right now, emailed me and said they thought it was a cool idea. They looked into it, and it basically wasn't possible without changing the orbit. And of course, the mission was not going to change the orbit, right? Because the orbital plane just wasn't quite aligned right for this to happen. They could do it. They could change the orbit. Maybe they still will, because Juno did get extended. And I think now the mission's been extended, they might be more willing to take risks. So maybe I should email them again and see if they're willing to roll that dice. That would be fun. But yeah, I think it is a challenging idea to test. But I'm convinced that the best way we're going to have to test this idea is not in the telescope form, but first as a transmitter and then as a telescope. I think that's going to be the easiest way to prove to people this lensing works. And it really should when you look at the physics. How do you balance communicating science in an engaging way while avoiding over-sensationalism? Well, that's not easy, because the YouTube trap is to sensationalize everything, right? And you see that. The more clickbaity you make your title, your thumbnail, you'll get more views, and that generates more interest, more subscribers. And it's sort of this cycle of, positive feedback where YouTube is encouraging you always, the algorithm's encouraging you to kind of do naughty things and to stretch the truth more and more. And I've seen other creators, I won't call them out, but I've seen other creators in the science domain definitely be a bit fast and loose with some of that. And I think, sometimes the titles we put up and the thumbnails we put up, I feel like, this is, I'm kind of okay with this, but this is close to the ceiling of my palette level. But the closer to the ceiling you go, the better the video will perform. And I think there are some YouTubers, science communicators, who make the case that it doesn't matter, because even if you have a somewhat disingenuous title, you are getting them to click your video. And then when you click your video, then you can do real science communication. That's just the hook. That's all it is the hook. So I am a little bit forgiving of that, but it's definitely a temptation. But even in the content itself, it's the same thing playing out, right? Because then can people just turn off the video if it's not sensationalism enough for them? And the more you jazz it up and push the limits, the more likely they are to share it, to stay watching for a long time, all of which helps your views and retention, things like that. So there's a lot going on there. I think for me, the fact I am a researcher, right? I'm a professor of astronomy, and I teach classes to undergraduate students, and I have to look them in the eye, and I have to give talks at science conferences and mentor my graduate students. All of that keeps me pretty true, I think, right? Because I can't be a complete jerk, bending the truth in order to get more views, to maximize and optimize the algorithm, and then in the same breath turn around to my students and say, actually, this is how it really is. So I think, it keeps me honest by doing both, and it's not easy to do both. I do think, if I was sane, I would probably quit being a professor and just do YouTube, because it would certainly be a lot more financially beneficial to do that. There's absolutely no doubt about that whatsoever. But I don't want to. Even though it would make more financial sense to do that, I love research, and I love truly just searching for objective truth. That's the whole reason why I became a scientist. So I can't imagine ever going that way of full-blown sensationalism, just because it'd be so incompatible with the original inspiration that drew me towards this subject in the first place. And so, maybe I don't think I'll ever be a 10 million. I don't think I'm ever going to get the diamond YouTube thing. It would be fun if we did one day. I don't think I'm ever going to be jazzy enough for the algorithm to promote me to that level. It's kind of a miracle, quite frankly, we're at 1 million. That is ridiculous. And I've made mistakes in the past, and I probably will make mistakes again in the future with these videos, but generally I am trying my best to teach you guys the philosophy of objectivity in science, of trying to remain open-minded, yet at the same time be evidence-based in our reasoning. And if nothing else, I hope that comes across in the videos. Do you think the rise of AI is a negative? I think so far it's not been a negative, but it obviously could very easily become a negative, and there's a huge amount of fear and concern about that possibility. Maybe there are some hints that it's having, it's stepping onto the shorelines of negativity right now. And certainly as an educator, I have deep concerns about that. In the classroom, we are trying to teach our students how to think, how to problem solve, how to use their brains, but that's intellectual labor. And the whole point of these tools, whatever you want to call them, some people argue about whether it's AI or whatever it is, AGI, LLMs, whatever you want to call it, these things are a way of offloading intellectual labor. And it's very easy and cheap and easy to do that. And so it is very tempting for these students to stop thinking and start offloading that work to these machines. So that is my deeper concern. More than a Skynet Terminator type situation of them taking over or launching a nuclear war or something. I mean, sure, that would be horrible. I just think that's a low probability outcome. I think the almost inevitable outcome, I'd give it more than a 50% chance of happening, is that we are just getting dumber, right? Because we are just letting computers do the thinking for us rather than really thinking for ourselves. At the same time, if used in a skillful and cognizant way, I think it can be an incredibly powerful tool. And I've certainly experienced this in my own research. We use these tools already, and many of my students do for coding. Wow, it is a game changer for coding. It can speed up tasks which would normally take you several days into a few hours. And it's going to make mistakes. It almost always makes mistakes in coding, but it still makes that initial process of debugging, of getting that first draft of the code just way, way easier. So I've been very impressed with it, but I do have deep concerns, and primarily it is about the societal concern of just people getting too intellectually lazy with it. Last question, how do you come up with original ideas? Great question, hard to answer. It's hard to tell someone how to be creative, right? But I think there are some strategies which, at least in my life, have helped. As a scientist, I think one of the most important things is to read the literature. You will hear so many professors say that, and it almost becomes a little bit kind of cliche to say read the literature, but it is so true. You have to read the literature. You have to be in touch with what is happening at the frontiers of your field. It would be a little bit like, if you didn't do this, it'd be a little bit like being at a cocktail party and there's a group of friends talking and you just walk in and just start saying something completely different. You just change, you force yourself into the conversation, just talk about something completely else. If you want to be heard and you truly want to make an impact and advance the conversation here is science in this analogy, then you have to listen to what they're saying first before you can join in and meaningfully advance things. And I do like this conversation analogy because it kind of lowers the bar a little bit for entry in some degrees. That yes, okay, you have to listen. That is a bar to entry. But the bar to actually add something isn't that you have got some masterpiece. When someone speaks up in a conversation, they are not expecting it to be some beautiful poetic thing which solves the entire field in that one, this whole conversation solved in that one comment. No, you are merely adding a little piece of information that moves things forward. And I think writing papers is a little bit like that. You're not supposed to solve everything in every paper. It's okay just to solve some problems and move things along in the right direction. Otherwise, you can get kind of caught in this kind of Leonardo da Vinci masterpiece syndrome where you just never finish everything and you're always worried about contributing. And that can be a little bit paralyzing as a scientist. So first, read literature, listen to what people are saying, and then it helps you to contribute. I think when you read the literature, it helps you to sort of have this mindset of poking holes. Scientists are trained to be skeptical, to try and find the flaws in other people's analysis. And I've had a huge number of ideas by doing that. I mean, probably some half of my papers are essentially finding things in the field that other people are doing, which I disagree with. And I think you could do that a little bit better. Not that my method is perfect, but it's a little bit better than the previous method. And then someone else will come along and say, actually, Kipping, your method isn't the best thing in town. Here's a slightly better way to do it. And I'm like, great, that's perfect. That's how a science is supposed to work. It advances like an iterative algorithm where we gradually improve step by step by step. And finally, I think sort of finding synergies between different fields. It's not enough, to be honest, just to read your own little narrow field. If you study, let's say, exoplanet atmosphere clouds, that's your speciality. You can't just read papers on clouds. That's not enough. You have to be in contact with the broader field, people studying the mineralogy of the surface, for instance, and to how that radiative transfer could impact your cloud formation, or even the spectroscopic retrieval of those clouds could be impacted by that. So you have to be in contact with other fields, even subdisciplines, and even completely different disciplines. I've sometimes found great ideas by sitting in a cosmology talk and hearing that they've come up with some new method for processing the data and thinking, we could do the same thing for exoplanets. Let's kind of borrow that technique. We'll have to transform it. We'll have to change some things to make it work. But this could be a really cool new direction to look at exoplanets in a new way. So being in contact with other fields is another great way for creativity. So those are my sort of 3 tips as a general strategy for staying creative in science. Wow, this was a lot of fun. I feel a little bit exhausted after answering all those questions, but I hope you enjoyed it as well. Lots of great questions. I know many of you asked questions I didn't have time to answer. I'm sorry, there was a lot. And maybe I'll answer some in the comments. So if you have more questions about anything I've said in this video, or other questions I didn't get around to, throw them down in the comment section. I'll do my best to answer those as well. So we'll be going back to our regularly scheduled programming going forward. This video was entirely unscripted. I'm sure that's completely obvious by the way I'm talking. And so it's probably a lot less eloquent and clear than my usual videos. But maybe you enjoyed this more kind of free-form format once in a while. Let me know what you think. And as always, guys, stay thoughtful and stay curious. So as you guys know, at the end of these videos, I like to give a huge thank you to our viewers, our subscribers, and especially our Cool Worlder donors. Thank you so much for your support. There is no way we would have made it to 1 million subscribers was it not for you guys. So a huge thank you from the bottom of my heart. And if you are watching this and are interested in supporting us, you can use the link up above and down below, where from the price of a coffee per month, you can support a real astrophysics research group right here in the Cool Worlds lab. So please do check that out. There'll be some special perks. I might do a gold button opening video when I get it. I think I should get it this weekend, so that's something to look out for.